Before your feet even touched the floor this morning, you were shaped. Before your first conscious thought, your desires were curated, your perceptions tilted, your choices gently herded down a pre-selected path. You believe your mind is your own private kingdom, a fortress of free will, but the gates were breached long ago, not by force, but by invitation. The startling truth is that by the time you began your day, you had already been influenced at least 17 times. Consider the first light of dawn filtering through your window, or the jarring blare of your alarm. The choice of that specific alarm tone was not an accident of random selection. It was a suggestion, a nudge toward a feeling of urgency or calm, planted by an app's designer who understood that sound primes the mind for the day ahead. As you reached for your phone, your thumb moved with a practiced, almost unconscious flick, opening a social media feed that was not a window to the world, but a hall of mirrors. Each post, each ad, each curated story was a whisper, a subtle argument for a lifestyle, a political opinion, a purchase. The smiling face of an influencer holding a specific brand of coffee did not just sell you beans. It sold you an idea of morning success, an identity you could purchase and consume. The influence did not stop when you put the phone down. It was woven into the fabric of your home. The placement of the cereal box on the kitchen counter, its bright colors and health claims screaming for attention over the quieter, plainer oatmeal canister, was a silent salesman. The morning news playing in the background, with its carefully selected headlines and the specific emotional cadence of the anchor's voice, framed your entire perception of the world before you had your first sip of juice. It told you what to fear, what to hope for, what was important. Even the route you mentally mapped for your commute was influenced by yesterday's traffic report or a map app's algorithm, subtly favoring one path over another without your conscious consent. These 17 influences, and the countless more that followed, operated in the silent theater of your subconscious. They did not ask for permission. They bypassed the gatekeeper of your critical thinking and appealed directly to the ancient, automatic parts of your brain that crave shortcuts, social validation, and safety. This is the grand illusion of free will, not that it doesn't exist, but that it operates on a stage where the sets, the lighting, and even the other actors have been arranged by unseen directors. You feel you are making choices, and you are, but you are choosing from a menu you did not write. This pervasive, invisible architecture of persuasion is the water we swim in, the air we breathe. It is the fundamental force shaping modern human behavior, and to understand it is to take the first step towards seeing the strings that have been pulling you all along. In 2013, within the bustling, steam-filled confines of a university cafeteria, a quiet revolution in human understanding was taking place. It was a revolution that required no speeches, no manifestos, and no conscious converts. The only evidence was a sudden, inexplicable surge in the consumption of apples and bananas. Researchers, acting as invisible architects, had performed a simple, almost laughably modest intervention. They had moved the bowls of fresh fruit a few feet closer to the cash registers, placing them directly in the line of sight and easy reach of hungry students. Nothing else changed. The menu remained identical. The prices were unaltered. The students, burdened with textbooks and the anxieties of undergraduate life, noticed nothing amiss in their culinary landscape. Yet their behavior transformed completely. Sales of fruit increased by 25%. A quarter more students, who the day before had walked past the same fruit displayed further down the serving line, were now plucking shiny red apples and bunches of yellow bananas and placing them on their trays. They did not do this out of a newfound commitment to health, nor because of a persuasive advertisement for the benefits of fiber and vitamins. There was no internal debate, no weighing of options between a cookie and an orange. The choice was made for them by their environment, by the sheer brute force convenience of the new arrangement. The healthier option became the easier option, and the human brain, a master of energy conservation, reliably took the path of least resistance. One could observe a first-year student, her mind buzzing with calculus formulas, shuffling along the stainless steel counter. Her eyes, glazed with mental fatigue, scanned the immediate vicinity. The fruit bowl was now right there, a splash of vibrant color next to the bland beige of the card reader. Her hand darted out, almost on autopilot, and grabbed an apple before she had even fully registered the other desserts available. The decision was made in the spinal cord, not the cerebrum. Another student, rushing to make a lecture, bypassed the longer line for the baked goods because the fruit was readily accessible at the checkout. He needed a quick snack, and the environment had conveniently provided the solution it wanted him to choose. This was the pure, unadulterated power of a nudge. It was influence stripped bare of any argument or coercion. It worked not by convincing the conscious mind, but by manipulating the context in which the mind operated. The cafeteria experiment was a perfect, sterile demonstration of a force that operates constantly in the messy real world. It proved that the battle for our choices is often won or lost long before we ever engage in conscious deliberation. The layout of a grocery store, the default settings on a website, the order of items on a menu, these are all modern-day versions of that repositioned fruit bowl. They are subtle tilts of the playing field that guide our behavior while allowing us to maintain the cherished illusion that we are the sole captains of our decisions. The students left the cafeteria that day, their stomachs slightly fuller with fiber, completely unaware that their appetite had been gently, invisibly, and powerfully orchestrated. The human mind is not a pristine, logical machine. It is a magnificent, cobbled-together relic, built for survival on ancient savannas, not for navigating the overwhelming complexity of the modern world. To cope, it relies on a set of mental shortcuts, heuristics, that allow it to make thousands of rapid-fire decisions without burning into a puddle of cognitive overload. These shortcuts are the brain's elegant, if sometimes flawed, architecture, and they are the very foundation upon which all influence is built. To understand how we are nudged, one must first understand the secret passageways and hidden levers already installed within our own minds. Consider the classic Mulalaya illusion, a simple drawing of two parallel lines, one flanked by arrowheads pointing inward, the other with arrowheads pointing outward. To the conscious, rational mind, they are objectively the same length. Yet to the visual system, a system honed by evolution to interpret depth and distance in a three-dimensional world, they are undeniably different. The brain, seeing the inward-pointing arrows as the corner of a room receding away, interprets that line as longer. The outward-pointing arrows suggest a corner jutting forward, shortening the line. A person looking at the illusion will swear, with absolute conviction, that one line is longer, their perception overriding the cold, hard data their eyes are providing. This is the first, fundamental rule of influence. Perception is not reality, but the brain treats it as such, and reality is powerless against a stubborn perception. This architectural flaw extends beyond simple lines into the very substance of our social judgments. In a Stark University laboratory, participants were recruited for what they were told was a simple psychological survey. Upon arrival, they were briefly handed a cup of coffee by a researcher, a seemingly innocuous, polite gesture. Half were given a cup of iced coffee, its surface beaded with condensation, chilling their fingers. The other half were given a steaming cup of fresh brew, its warmth seeping into their palms. They then read a description of a fictional person and were asked to rate that individual's personality traits. The results were startlingly consistent. Those who had held the warm cup rated the person as significantly warmer, more generous, and more caring. Those who had held the iced cup described the same person as colder, more distant, and more selfish. There was no logical connection between the temperature of a beverage and the character of a stranger. Yet the mental shortcut was undeniable. The physical sensation of warmth had activated the associated concept of interpersonal warmth in their minds, and their brains, seeking a coherent narrative, applied that filter to the information they were evaluating. A young woman, her hand still tingling from the heat of the cup, read about the fictional character's minor act of kindness and saw profound generosity. A man, flexing his cold, stiffened fingers, interpreted the exact same act as calculated and insincere. Their judgments were not their own. They were a downstream effect of a physical sensation they had already forgotten, a ghost in the machine of their cognition. These heuristics, the reliance on visual cues, the associative linking of physical and psychological traits, are not bugs in our system. They are features that allowed our ancestors to quickly identify a predator in the tall grass or decide if a stranger was friend or foe. But in a world filled with sophisticated persuaders, this ancient architecture becomes a vulnerability. The mental shortcuts that once ensured our survival now make us susceptible to invisible nudges, priming us to see what isn't there and to feel what we haven't earned. The scaffolding of the mind, built for a simpler time, is the very framework upon which modern influence is effortlessly and invisibly constructed. The lone voice of reason is a fragile thing, easily drowned out by the rhythmic, reassuring stampede of the crowd. In a drab laboratory in the 1950s, Solomon Asch built a perfect trap for the human ego, a trap baited with nothing more than a few simple lines on a set of cards. A participant, let's call him David, would arrive, believing he was taking part in a study on visual perception. He was seated at a table with 7 other men, all of whom were secretly in on the experiment. The task was absurdly simple: identify which of 3 comparison lines matched a single standard line. The answer was always obvious, a matter of childlike clarity. For the first 2 rounds, the Confederates gave the correct answer, and David, relaxed, gave his. Then, on the 3rd trial, the first Confederate confidently declared that a line clearly several inches shorter was the match. David's brow would furrow slightly. The second Confederate agreed with the first, then the third and the fourth. As the chorus of unanimous error swelled, David's posture would change. He would lean forward, squinting at the cards, his certainty beginning to crumble under the weight of collective assurance. By the time it was his turn to speak, a silent war was raging behind his eyes. The evidence of his own vision screamed one truth, but the social reality of 7 confident peers screamed another. In a significant number of cases, David would surrender. His voice, often quiet and hesitant, would side with the herd, agreeing with a falsehood so blatant he would have laughed at it moments before. He chose belonging over accuracy, the comfort of conformity over the isolation of being right. This ancient herd instinct, once a matter of literal life and death on the plains, where straying from the group meant becoming prey, has been reborn in the digital savannah. It is the engine of modern social proof, the invisible current that pulls individuals into synchronized thought and action. A teenager, scrolling through TikTok in the blue glow of her bedroom, sees a cascade of videos featuring a specific dance move, a particular audio clip, a new slang term. She does not analyze its merit or question its origin. She sees the view counts, the likes, the endless replication. The sheer volume of participation becomes its own justification, its own truth. Within days, she is recording her own version, her individuality momentarily suspended as she merges with the digital flock. The trend holds no intrinsic value. Its power is derived purely from the fact that everyone else is doing it. This same force dictates the rhythms of the physical world. A couple walks down a city street looking for a place to eat dinner. They pass several quiet, empty restaurants, their instincts subtly warning them away. Then they see one with a line out the door, a buzz of conversations spilling from its entrance. They do not stop to read the menu or consider the cuisine. The crowd is a living, breathing 5-star review. They take their place at the end of the line, their decision made not by their own palate, but by the implied judgment of strangers. On a site like Yelp, a restaurant's fate can hinge on those first few reviews. A single 1-star rating can create a narrative of failure, scuttling a business before it has a chance. Conversely, a cluster of 5-star reviews creates a bandwagon effect, a snowball of popularity that feels like objective quality, but is often just the Asch experiment playing out on a global scale. People in a crowded concert venue do not decide when to clap. They listen for the start of the applause and join in, their hands moving in unison like leaves shaken by a common wind. Investors see a stock's price rising and frantically buy in, not because of the company's fundamentals, but because they fear missing out on the collective movement. In each case, the individual's internal compass is demagnetized by the powerful pull of the crowd. The tension between the self and the herd is a fundamental human conflict, and in a world saturated with signals about what is popular, approved, and normal, the herd is winning. We follow not because we are weak, but because our brains are wired to believe that the many are a safer bet than the one, that the path worn bare by countless feet must lead somewhere worthwhile, even when it leads us straight over a cliff of our own making. The primal panic of a dwindling food supply, the frantic scramble for the last water source in a drought. These ancient alarms still ring deep within the modern human brain, repurposed now for the hunt for limited edition sneakers and the last flat-screen television on Black Friday. Scarcity is not merely a condition of shortage. It is a psychological trigger, a siren that shuts down the careful, deliberative parts of the mind and hands control over to a far older, more desperate system concerned with one thing only: loss prevention. When something is perceived as rare or disappearing, its value becomes inflated not by its inherent worth, but by the terrifying specter of missing out. This principle is weaponized with clinical precision in the consumer world. A luxury watchmaker announces a run of only 500 pieces of a new model. The watch is functionally identical to its mass-produced sibling, but the knowledge of its finite number ignites a fire in the collector's mind. The object transforms from a timepiece into a totem, a piece of exclusive history that must be possessed. A person who would normally deliberate for months over such a significant purchase instead finds their heart racing, their fingers clumsily entering credit card details online, driven by a fear that if they hesitate, the opportunity will vanish forever. The logical assessment of cost and benefit is drowned out by the emotional roar of potential loss. The shopper isn't buying a watch, they are buying immunity from the regret of not having it. Nowhere is this raw neurological hijacking more visible than in the annual ritual of Black Friday. Hours before dawn, crowds gather in the parking lots of big-box stores, their breath misting in the frigid air, a low thrum of anticipation building into a palpable tension. They are not just shoppers, they are modern-day hunters, and the prey is a limited quantity of deeply discounted electronics. When the doors finally crash open, the orderly line dissolves into a surging, single-minded organism. The scene is one of pure, unmediated instinct. A man in a thick coat abandons all pretense of civility, his eyes locked on a pallet of gaming consoles, his body shoving past others in a blind rush. A woman grabs for the last discounted blender, her fingers closing around the box at the same instant as another's, a brief, wordless tug-of-war where the object's utility is irrelevant. It is now a prize, a symbol of victory in a battle against scarcity. This desperate behavior is not a modern invention of consumerism. It is an evolutionary heirloom. For 99% of human history, survival depended on securing scarce resources. The berry bush that was not stripped bare today would be empty tomorrow. The antelope that got away meant hunger for the tribe. The human brain evolved to prioritize immediate acquisition in the face of shortage, to value a sure thing now over a potential thing later. The neural pathways that once flooded our ancestors with adrenaline at the sight of the last piece of game are the same pathways that light up today when a website flashes a message. Only 3 left in stock. The brain does not distinguish between a life-saving resource and a discounted smart speaker. It only recognizes the ancient, urgent pattern of scarcity and activates the same loss prevention protocol. This is the dark genius of scarcity as a tool of influence. It bypasses reason and speaks directly to the most visceral, survival-oriented parts of our psyche. It makes us competitive, impulsive, and emotional. We cease to ask if we truly need the item or if it is fairly priced. The only question that matters is one etched into our DNA by millennia of precarious existence. Can I afford to let this get away? In that moment of perceived shortage, the modern, sophisticated self vanishes, and all that remains is a hunter on the savannah, desperately lunging for the last piece of meat before the hyenas get it, convinced that what is scarce must be valuable, and what is vanishing must be possessed at any cost. The white lab coat is one of the most potent tools of influence ever created, a symbol so imbued with trust and expertise that it can compel ordinary people to perform extraordinary acts, even against the protests of their own conscience. In a series of stark, fluorescent-lit rooms at Yale University in the 1960s, this power was tested to its terrifying limits. The Milgram obedience experiments were not about memory or learning, as the participants were told, but about the terrifying distance a human being will travel when following a command from a perceived authority. A volunteer, a middle-aged man named Mr. Wallace, arrived believing he was to act as a teacher in a study on punishment. He was introduced to the experimenter, a stern man in a grey lab coat, and another participant, the learner, who was, in reality, an actor. Mr. Wallace was seated before a formidable-looking shock generator, its panel lined with switches labeled with escalating voltages, from a mild 15 volts to a lethal, clearly marked 450 volts. His task was simple: administer a word pair test to the learner in the next room and deliver an electric shock for every wrong answer, increasing the voltage each time. As the test progressed, the learner began to make mistakes. At 75 volts, the learner grunted in discomfort. At 120 volts, he complained loudly about the pain. At 150 volts, he demanded to be released from the experiment. Mr. Wallace would grow agitated, his hands trembling. He would turn to the experimenter, the man in the lab coat, his face a mask of conflict. "I think he's in pain," he would say, his voice tight with anxiety. The experimenter would reply with calm, unwavering authority. "The experiment requires that you continue." He was not threatening, merely confident, a representative of the institution of science. And so, Mr. Wallace, a decent man who would never dream of harming another, would turn back to the machine. He heard the learner's agonized screams at 270 volts. He heard a terrifying silence after 330 volts, a silence that suggested something had gone horribly wrong. Yet when the man in the lab coat assured him that the learner's failure to respond was not a problem and that he must continue, the majority of participants, like Mr. Wallace, did. They pushed the final, deadly-looking switches, their own moral compasses shattered by the sheer, unassailable confidence of the authority figure. They obeyed not because they were cruel, but because the symbol of expertise, the lab coat and the institutional setting, had become more real, more powerful, than the evidence of their own ears and the screaming of their own conscience. This blind spot for confident authority is not confined to the laboratory. It is woven into the fabric of daily life. A woman in a pilot's uniform, even if she is merely a passenger, can calm a nervous flyer more effectively than 1,000 statistics on airline safety. A person in a sharp security guard's outfit can direct a crowd with effortless command, their instructions followed without question, even if they are leading people the wrong way. The uniform is a shortcut for the brain, a signal that says, "This person knows what they are doing. Critical thinking is no longer required." We cede our judgment to the badge, the title, the suit, because it is cognitively easier than constantly evaluating every claim for ourselves. This vulnerability is compounded by a cruel cognitive irony known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. It posits that the least competent people in a given domain are often the most confident in their abilities, precisely because their lack of skill prevents them from recognizing the depth of their own ignorance. A novice investor, after a few weeks of reading online forums, becomes supremely confident in his stock-picking abilities, blind to the complex market forces he fails to understand. He speaks with unwavering certainty, his voice ringing with an authority he has not earned. A new manager, fresh from a promotion, issues sweeping, ill-conceived directives with absolute confidence, her lack of experience masked by the sheer force of her delivery. People around them, conditioned to equate confidence with competence, often obey. Junior employees will waste days on a futile project because the confident manager said it was a priority. Friends will follow the novice investor's advice, losing money because his bravado felt more trustworthy than a certified financial planner's cautious, nuanced counsel. In these moments, the hierarchy of influence is clear. A confident voice, regardless of its connection to truth, will almost always overpower a hesitant truth. The brain, seeking a reliable guide in a complex world, mistakes the performance of authority for the substance of expertise. We are wired to follow the person who sounds like they know the way, even when they are leading us, with absolute conviction, directly into the dark. Before a thought can form, before a decision can be made, the stage must be set. The mind is not a blank slate at the moment of choice. It is a canvas already textured with invisible brushstrokes, primed by whispers it never consciously heard. This is the realm of priming, where subtle, fleeting cues laid down in the subconscious lay the tracks for future thoughts and behaviors, guiding the train of action long before the conscious conductor even arrives at the station. Influence, in its most elegant and insidious form, happens not during the argument, but in the quiet moments before the argument even begins. In a quiet, carpeted hallway at a university, a classic experiment unfolded. A group of students was asked to rearrange a series of scrambled words into coherent sentences. For one group, the word lists were subtly salted with terms associated with the elderly. Florida, forgetful, wrinkle, bald, bingo. The task was purely linguistic, requiring focus and grammar with no mention of age or behavior. After completing the test, the students were told the experiment was over and were directed to walk down the hall to another room for a final debriefing. It was in this unmonitored, seemingly irrelevant walk that the true experiment took place. Researchers, with stopwatches hidden in their palms, clocked their pace. The students, who had been piecing together sentences about old age, walked down the corridor significantly more slowly than a control group who had worked with neutral words. Their brains, having been subtly activated by the concept of slowness and aging, unconsciously manifested that concept in their physical bodies. They did not feel sluggish. They had no awareness of their altered pace. The prime had worked its magic below the surface of consciousness, a ghost in the machine dictating the tempo of their gait. This invisible choreography extends beyond hallways and into the soft-lit ambience of a supermarket wine aisle. A store manager, curious about the power of suggestion, decided to alternate the background music played through the overhead speakers. On some days, the air was filled with the robust, accordion-heavy strains of French music. On other days, the crisp, guitar-led rhythms of German Biergarten tunes took over. The results were as clear as a fine Riesling. On French music days, sales of French wines skyrocketed, outselling their German counterparts. On German music days, the opposite occurred. Shoppers, wheeling their carts and contemplating labels, would swear they were making a choice based on region, grape, or price. They were unaware that their selection had been gently herded by the subconscious association triggered by the soundtrack. The music primed a national identity, and the brain, seeking coherence, guided the hand to the bottle that matched the melody. To feel this force at work in your own mind, try a simple exercise. For the next 10 seconds, look around the room you are in and count every single object that is the color red. Do it now. Close the book and count. Now, without looking again, tell me, what color is the carpet? What was the title of the book sitting on the table? Your mind, having been primed to seek out the color red, likely filtered out a wealth of other information. The prime red acted as a mental spotlight, illuminating certain features of your environment while casting others into shadow. Your perception was not a full and accurate recording of reality. It was a curated selection, shaped by the initial instruction. This is the essence of priming in daily life. The news headline you skimmed before work primed you to see threats in neutral interactions. The advertisement for a luxury car you passed on your commute primed you to feel a slight dissatisfaction with your own reliable vehicle. These cues are the subtle tilts that shape the landscape of your mind, ensuring you notice what the architect wants you to notice and overlook the rest. A young man sits in a job interview, his palms slightly damp. Just before entering the building, he had waited in a lobby adorned with abstract art featuring sharp, aggressive angles and dark, imposing colors. Unbeknownst to him, the art has primed his brain with concepts of competition and harsh judgment. When the interviewer asks a challenging question, the man's mind, already tilted toward defensiveness, interprets the query as an attack. His answers become shorter, more guarded. He leaves the interview feeling it went poorly, never knowing that the art on the wall had framed the entire conversation before a single word was spoken. Elsewhere, a woman reads a social media post filled with words like kindness and community. A few minutes later, her friend asks for a small, inconvenient favor. The woman, her subconscious still humming with the language of generosity, agrees readily, and with a smile, her behavior a quiet echo of the words she has just consumed. Priming is the ultimate demonstration of prediction before perception. The brain is not a passive receiver of information. It is an active predictor, constantly using recent experience to guess what comes next. A prime is a suggestion, a nudge that tells the brain what to expect, and the brain, eager to be right, makes it so. It adjusts perception, mood, and behavior to fit the preloaded narrative. We move through our days believing we are reacting to the world as it is, but in truth, we are often just living out predictions written in invisible ink on the walls of our own minds, our every step guided by influences that flashed by too quickly to ever be seen. A life-saving surgery carries a 90% survival rate. The very same procedure carries a 10% mortality rate. The mathematical truth is identical, a cold, hard equation of life and death. Yet the human response to each statement is a world apart. The first frame, 90% survival, feels like hope, a beacon of medical triumph. The second, 10% mortality, feels like a chilling risk, a roll of the dice with terrifying stakes. The facts are untouched, but the lens through which they are viewed has completely altered the emotional landscape, and with it, the decision a patient is likely to make. This is the power of framing, the art of constructing reality not by changing the events themselves, but by changing the window through which they are seen. The story is not in the data, it is in the frame that holds it. This psychological alchemy is wielded with precision in the theater of politics. Two news networks report on the exact same economic data, a slight rise in unemployment coupled with a significant drop in inflation. One network's headline screams, "Economic crisis, DEPNS. Thousands lose jobs as nation struggles." The story focuses on the shuttered storefronts and the anxious faces in unemployment lines, framing the data as a narrative of failure and decline. The other network's headline glows, "Inflation TAMED, relief for families as prices fall." Its report shows smiling shoppers enjoying lower grocery bills, framing the very same statistics as a story of victory and resilience. A viewer of the first report feels a knot of anxiety in his stomach, his perception of the country's health darkening. A viewer of the second feels a surge of optimism, his faith in the economy restored. Neither is being lied to. They are simply being shown different corners of the same room, and each believes they have seen the whole truth. The frame has built their reality for them. In a quiet doctor's office, a woman named Sarah sits with her specialist, the air smelling of antiseptic and anxiety. She has a non-aggressive form of cancer, and she is presented with two treatment paths. The doctor, a man who understands the weight of words, could frame the options in two ways. He could say, with surgery A, you have a 90% chance of being alive in 5 years. Or he could say, with surgery A, you have a 10% chance of being dead in 5 years. The outcome is statistically the same, but the first frame, focusing on life, makes the surgery feel like a safe harbor. The second, focusing on death, makes it feel like a dangerous gamble. Sarah, a pragmatic accountant, finds her professional objectivity melting away under the heat of this emotional framing. Her logical mind knows the numbers are equivalent, but her primal mind, the part that fears the void, recoils from the version that speaks of mortality. She feels a gravitational pull toward the surgery framed in terms of survival, her choice being shaped not by the odds, but by the language used to describe them. Later that evening, Sarah scrolls through a news aggregator on her phone, seeking distraction. She sees two articles about a new city ordinance. The first is titled, "City Council Invests in Safety. New Funds for Streetlights and Crosswalks." The second reads, "City Council Raises Taxes, Residents to Footbill for Unnecessary Infrastructure." It is the same policy, the same allocation of funds. But the first frame paints a picture of communal benefit and proactive care. The second constructs a narrative of government overreach and financial burden. Sarah, still raw from her medical decision, finds herself reacting with immediate agreement to the first headline and irritation at the second. She doesn't stop to deconstruct the language, she simply absorbs the reality that the frame presents. Her opinion on the ordinance is formed in an instant, a direct emotional response to the architect's chosen lens. This is the subtle tyranny of the frame. It bypasses analytical thought and speaks directly to the underlying values and fears of the audience. A product advertised as 95% fat-free feels inherently healthier and more desirable than one labeled contains 5% fat. A glass described as half full inspires a different feeling and a different subsequent action than one described as half empty. We believe we are evaluating the content, but we are often merely reacting to the container. The frame sets the boundaries of the debate, defines the terms of success and failure, and highlights certain aspects of an issue while obscuring others. It is the ultimate tool for reality construction, a way of building a persuasive world out of selective truths, guiding people to a predetermined conclusion while allowing them to believe they have arrived there entirely on their own, never realizing that the path they walked was laid out for them long before they ever took the first step. A laugh can be more contagious than a yawn, a scowl more infectious than a common cold. Emotions do not simply reside within the individual. They are social forces, rippling outward from person to person with the silent, pervasive speed of a virus, rewriting moods and altering judgments long before a single word of explanation can be uttered. In 2014, the world's largest social network conducted an experiment that proved this phenomenon on an unprecedented scale. For 1 week, researchers secretly manipulated the emotional content of nearly 700,000 users' news feeds. For one group, posts containing positive words were systematically filtered out, leaving a feed subtly tilted toward negativity. For another, posts with negative expressions were hidden, creating an artificially cheerful stream. Results were startlingly clear. The users who saw less positive content subsequently produced fewer positive posts of their own and more negative ones. Those who saw less negative content did the opposite, their own updates becoming sunnier and more optimistic. Their emotional states had been shifted, not by any life event or conscious persuasion, but by the invisible, ambient emotional weather of their digital environment. They were catching feelings from strangers, their inner lives harmonizing with a silent, algorithmically conducted choir. This viral transmission is not confined to the digital ether. It operates with even greater potency in the shared physical space of a crowd. Consider a minor league baseball game on a warm summer evening. The home team is down by 2 runs in the bottom of the 9th inning, the air thick with a collective, resigned disappointment. The stands are a sea of slumped shoulders and muted conversations. Then a rookie batter, called up from the minors just days before, smashes an unlikely double. A flicker of hope, small and isolated, appears in one section. A man in a faded team jersey leaps to his feet, pumping his fist, his raw, unfiltered joy a stark contrast to the surrounding apathy. It is a solitary spark, but it lands on the dry tinder of collective desire. The person next to him, feeding off his energy, stands up too, her own clapping hands amplifying the signal. Within seconds, the single spark has become a prairie fire. The entire stadium is on its feet, roaring, the earlier despair utterly erased, replaced by a unified, thunderous optimism. The crowd's mood had not changed through reasoned argument or a sudden shift in the game's statistics. It had been infected, transformed by a viral emotion that leaped from one person to the next, bypassing conscious thought and speaking directly to the shared, primal core of the group. This emotional connectivity is the silent orchestra conductor of social life, its baton directing the rhythms of our interactions in ways we rarely perceive. In a crowded downtown coffee shop during the morning rush, the air is typically a low hum of focused urgency. But one day, a harried barista, overwhelmed by a broken espresso machine and a relentless line, lets her frustration boil over. She slams a portafilter down on the counter, her face a tight mask of irritation. She says nothing, but the sharp sound and her tense posture send a ripple through the space. A customer waiting for his order, who had been patiently scrolling on his phone, feels a sudden, unaccountable spike of impatience. He taps his foot, his own posture stiffening. The woman behind him, sensing his tension, lets out an exasperated sigh. The emotional state of one stressed employee, communicated through 1,000 subtle, nonverbal cues, has virally infected a dozen patrons, turning an orderly queue into a cauldron of shared, low-grade annoyance. Their individual moods have been hijacked, their judgments of the wait time suddenly becoming more severe, all because they unconsciously mirrored the feeling radiating from a single source. Elsewhere at a dinner party, a similar invisible exchange takes place. The host, a woman named Clara, had a difficult day at work, but she has plastered on a bright, welcoming smile, determined to be a good hostess. Her best friend, Maya, arrives and immediately senses the strain beneath the cheer. Without a word being said about it, Maya feels her own buoyant mood deflate slightly, a sympathetic gravity pulling at her. She finds herself speaking in a softer, more measured tone, mirroring Clara's hidden emotional frequency. Across the room, another guest tells a hilarious story, and the room erupts in genuine laughter. Clara, hearing the unified joy, finds her own forced smile softening into a real one. The positive emotion of the group begins to overwrite her private negativity, her shoulders relaxing as she is absorbed into the collective mirth. Throughout the evening, the emotional currents flow back and forth, anxiety, amusement, contentment passing from person to person like a social contagion. Each individual leaves the party carrying not just the memory of the conversations, but the residual emotional imprint of the group, a composite feeling they caught rather than created, a testament to the profound, invisible threads that bind our inner lives to the hearts of those around us. The most powerful persuader in human history has no face, no voice, and no conscience. It operates in the silent, chilled corridors of server farms, a ghost in the machine that has learned to speak the native language of your desires, your fears, and your biases. This is the algorithm, the invisible architect of the modern mind, and its influence is not a gentle nudge, but a constant, automated current, pulling you deeper into a world it has built specifically for you. The era of human-to-human persuasion is fading, replaced by a new age where influence is coded, scaled and perfected by machines that know you better than you know yourself. The process begins innocently enough, with a single, seemingly random click. A user, let's call him Leo, idly watches a 30-second video of a man restoring a rusted vintage knife. He feels a flicker of satisfaction at the transformation, the scrape of steel, and the final, gleaming result. He scrolls on, forgetting it instantly, but the algorithm does not forget. That single click was a data point, a vote cast for a specific genre of content. It cross-references this vote with thousands of others. The car restoration channel he subscribed to last month, the woodworking tutorial he searched for last week. It identifies a pattern Leo himself has never articulated, a deep-seated appreciation for process, for the tangible transformation of old into new. The next time he opens his video feed, the algorithm serves him not one, but 3 more restoration videos. He watches them all. Each view is another confirmation, another brick laid in the wall of his personalized digital reality. Within a week, his entire feed is a curated museum of craftsmanship, blacksmiths, luthiers, watchmakers. He has not searched for any of it. The algorithm has anticipated his desire, feeding a latent interest until it becomes a dominant obsession. Leo feels he has discovered a fascinating new corner of the internet, never realizing he was led there by an invisible guide who built the path one click at a time. This automated curation creates the most potent psychological environment ever devised, the perfect echo chamber. Another user, a woman named Anya, holds moderately liberal political views. She follows a few left-leaning commentators and occasionally shares articles critiquing conservative policy. The algorithm, tasked with maximizing her engagement, notes that her dwell time is longest on content expressing moral outrage. It begins to filter her information stream, subtly amplifying the most extreme voices within her ideological camp. The nuanced, complex articles are pushed down. The incendiary, emotionally charged posts are boosted to the top. Her digital world becomes a hall of mirrors, each reflection showing her a more radicalized version of her own beliefs, with the opposing side portrayed as a monstrous, unified caricature. Anya's views begin to harden. Her language becomes more absolute, her certainty more unshakable. She is not being argued into a new position. She is being isolated in a fortress of her own making, its walls built and reinforced by a machine that profits from her escalating conviction. She is trapped in a feedback loop of her own preferences, a prisoner in a cell she mistakes for the entire world. The ultimate expression of this automated influence is micro-targeting, the surgical strike of persuasion. In the high-stakes arena of a political campaign, voters are no longer broad demographics, but individual psychological profiles, each with a unique constellation of hopes and insecurities. A data broker's algorithm identifies a man, Robert, as a fiscally conservative father of two who has expressed anxiety about his job security. The political operatives purchase access to him. Robert's social media feed, which he considers his private space, begins to show him a very specific ad. It does not feature the candidate's full platform or a party logo. It shows a grainy, emotional video of a factory closing, with a voiceover about protecting American jobs from foreign competition. The ad is seen only by a few thousand people in Robert's precise psychological and geographical segment. It speaks directly to his deepest, unspoken fear. He feels a jolt of connection, a sense that this candidate understands him personally. He never sees the contradictory ads shown to environmentalists or civil libertarians. He is living in a parallel political universe, receiving a bespoke reality designed to trigger one specific emotional response and one specific action at the ballot box. His agency has not been stolen, it has been bypassed. The algorithm delivered the right key for the right lock, and the door of his mind swung open without a sound. This is the new landscape of influence. There are no cafeteria fruit bowls or men in lab coats. There is only you and the mirror, and the ghost holding it, constantly adjusting the angle to show you exactly what you want to see, reflecting back a self that is increasingly a product of its own automated curation. The loss of agency is not a dramatic seizure, but a quiet, comfortable surrender to a stream of perfect, personalized relevance, where every choice feels like your own, even as the menu from which you choose is written by a machine that learned your tastes by watching you in your sleep. The invisible architecture of influence is not a prison, it is a maze, and every maze has an exit if you know how to read the walls. The power to resist does not lie in building a fortress around your mind, an impossible task in a world of permeable thoughts, but in learning to see the subtle shifts in the light, to feel the gentle tilt of the floor before you take a step. Resistance begins not with defiance, but with perception, a slow, deliberate awakening to the hidden currents that have been carrying you along. It is the art of noticing the nudge before your foot leaves the ground. The first and most potent tool is the simple act of naming. A man named Ben, standing in the dizzying glow of a department store, feels a sudden, sharp desire for a limited edition watch glinting under a spotlight. The old script would have played out automatically, a quickening pulse, a hand reaching for a wallet, the thrill of acquisition. But today, Ben pauses. He does not fight the feeling, he dissects it. He turns the emotion over in his mind and gives it its true name, scarcity. Just naming the lever, identifying the psychological mechanism being used on him, robs it of its mystical power. The watch is no longer a unique object of desire, it is a case study. The urgency evaporates, replaced by a cool, analytical curiosity. He sees the deliberate lighting, the only 5 left. Sign not as features of the watch, but as features of the trap. By identifying the tool of influence, he steps out of its target zone and becomes an observer of his own cognition. This practice of naming expands into the broader skill of pattern spotting. A woman named Chloe, scrolling through her social media feed, notices a familiar heat rising in her chest, a simmering anger at a political post. Instead of diving into the comments, she leans back from the screen. She scans the rest of her feed and sees a pattern. 3 out of the last 5 posts were designed to provoke outrage. They used loaded language, us versus them framing, and dehumanizing imagery. She recognizes the pattern of emotional contagion and tribal framing. Seeing the pattern is like seeing the wires holding up a puppet. The illusion of a free-floating, justified anger collapses. The emotion does not disappear, but it is now bracketed, understood as a designed response rather than an organic truth. She closes the app, her mind clearing like a sky after a sudden, manufactured storm. The resistance was not in suppressing her anger, but in recognizing its source. The single most disruptive act in the modern world is to simply slow down. The entire economy of influence is built on speed, on leveraging the automatic, heuristic-driven part of the brain that makes snap judgments. To insert a moment of pause is to switch the lights on in a dark room. A couple, Maria and Sam, are in a car dealership, the smell of new leather filling the air. A smooth-talking sales manager, his voice dripping with confident authority, lays out a today-only financing offer. The pressure is palpable, a physical force pushing them toward a signature. This is the moment where automated responses fail. Instead of reacting, Maria asks for a glass of water. It is a small, simple request, but it creates a 60-second pause. In that silence, the frantic energy of the situation dissipates. They step outside under the pretext of discussing it, leaving the influence-laden environment. In the quiet of the parking lot, they can finally hear themselves think. They check their emotional state, the excitement mixed with anxiety, and they ask the foundational question of resistance: who benefits? The answer, suddenly obvious, guides them back to their car, their decision deferred, their autonomy reclaimed. These techniques are not abstract theories, they are shields forged in the fires of daily life. A teenager, Liam, feels a powerful pull to buy a new video game all his friends are playing. He feels the ache of social proof, the fear of being left out. He stops, names the feeling, and asks himself who benefits from his purchase. The clarity that follows allows him to decide based on his own budget and interest, not the herd's momentum. An office worker, Fatima, reads an email from her boss framed as a great opportunity that feels, in her gut, like an unfair burden. She spots the framing technique, slows her response, and considers the true cost and benefit. Her reply is measured and questioning, disrupting the assumption of automatic compliance. This is empowerment through awareness. It is not a paranoid vigilance against a hostile world, but a mindful engagement with a persuasive one. It is the understanding that your mind has a backdoor, and that while you cannot brick it up forever, you can post a guard. You can learn the tells of the pickpocket, not to live in fear of theft, but to walk through the crowd with your hands securely on your wallet. The goal is not to become immune to influence, which is to become less than human, but to become a conscious participant in the dance, able to feel the push and choose, with clear eyes, whether to step with it or to stand your ground. The resistance begins the moment you realize the current is there and that you too can learn to swim. Influence is not a monster lurking in the shadows. It is the very weather of human connection, the invisible medium through which we all move, breathe, and shape one another. From the primal pull of the herd to the silent, algorithmic currents of the digital age, these forces are woven into the fabric of society, as natural and pervasive as gravity. They are not inherently evil, for they can guide a lost traveler to safety, inspire a crowd to kindness, or nudge a student toward a healthier lunch. The true nature of influence is neutral, a tool, a language, a fundamental law of social physics. The only thing that gives it a moral charge is awareness. The choice is not whether to be influenced, but whether to see the hand that turns the dial. The journey through these pages has been a map of that invisible landscape. You have walked through the cafeteria and felt the subtle tilt of the floor guiding your choices. You have stood in the laboratory and felt the crushing weight of the lab coat, the seductive pull of the confident voice. You have felt the primal panic of scarcity ignite in your chest, and the quiet, viral spread of a stranger's emotion rewrite your own. You have seen how the frame around a fact can be more powerful than the fact itself, and how a single, unseen prime can set the tempo for your entire day. You have peered behind the screen to watch the ghost in the machine, learning your secrets and building you a world of your own deepest preferences. And finally, you were given the tools to post a guard at the back door of your mind, to name the levers, spot the patterns, and slow the frantic pace long enough to ask the one question that changes everything. Now, as this exploration concludes, the narrative returns to you, the reader, sitting in the quiet space after the storm of revelation. The evidence has been presented, the mechanisms laid bare. The central, lingering question is no longer about how influence works, but about the state of your own perception. Are you aware? Has the lens been cleaned? Do you now feel the gentle pressure of a nudge as you scroll through your feed, or hear the faint echo of social proof in a crowded room? Can you sense the architecture of a choice before you make it, noticing the placement of the fruit, the color of the carpet, the emotional weather of the people around you? This awareness is not a destination, but a practice, a continuous, gentle vigilance that transforms you from a passenger into a navigator. The transformation is not into a person of pure, unassailable logic, for that is an impossible and lonely ideal. It is a transformation into a more mindful, more integrated human being. It is the integration of the ancient, intuitive self with the modern, critical self. It is allowing the herd instinct to warn you of danger while refusing to let it stampede you off a cliff. It is feeling the thrill of scarcity while still consulting a budget. It is appreciating the comfort of authority while verifying its claims. This is the essence of mindful living in a persuasive world. Not to eradicate your automatic responses, but to build a conscious partnership with them, to listen to their whispers without being enslaved by their shouts. This is the final call to action, not to a barricade, but to a more awakened life. Carry this awareness with you like a soft light. Let it illuminate the menus, the headlines, the advertisements, and the conversations. Let it help you distinguish between your own authentic desires and the reflections cast by 1,000 cunning mirrors. The goal is not to live in a state of cynical suspicion, but to engage with the world with greater clarity, agency, and grace. To see the strings is not to cut them all, but to understand the puppeteer, and perhaps, when the moment is right, to take hold of them yourself. The greatest power was never immunity. It was, and always will be, awareness. The question remains, and it is one you will answer with every choice you make from this moment forward. Are you aware?